Hello everyone, Stephen K. Moore, aka Steve-O here. We're continuing with our Christian Response series. The big thing on the internet today is mass deportations. I did a little search, man. There are lots of articles about the Christian perspective on this, so let's talk about it. And let's start off just to make sure we're not just doing what most of those articles do. Oh, Jesus wouldn't deport people. He was a refugee once. Well, first of all, let's just start with scripture. From 1 Peter 2, 13 through 16, Peter talking about the purpose of civil authority. This is what he says: "Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, as sent by him, the Lord, to punish those who do evil and praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God." So here's the first thing that I want to continue. We live in a time, and governmental authorities know this. That's a subject for a different day, but they know that most people in America, especially today, make emotion-based decisions. The problem with that is, and the reason why they are so into this, is that our emotions can be so easily manipulated. And we'll give some examples of that as we talk today. But what we really want to be concerned with, totally seriously as Christians, is what is true, because that's what Jesus is concerned about. You can attempt to be compassionate by some sort of an emotional concept of, oh, we need to be kind to all people. Well, hold that thought. Let's look at the situation. There's a story that Stephen Covey told about riding on public transportation one time, and they stop at one of the stops, and this dad and a few kids get on board, and the dad just sits down and stares straight ahead, and his kids are just screaming and running, bumping into people, and everyone's getting very annoyed, and everyone's getting very emotional because these kids are just out of control, and the dad's not paying any attention to them at all. And finally, Stephen Covey was like, hey, he steps to the guy and he says, hey, listen, man, your kids are really not behaving well, really upsetting people. And the guy kind of looked up, and he was kind of almost like he was in a daze. And he's like, oh, man, I am so sorry. You're right. We just left the hospital, and their mom just died. And it's like, whoa, like Stephen Covey said, all of a sudden the whole situation changed when you knew the truth. The origin of the behavior of the kids, how they got there in that moment. The truth is important, folks, not just the emotionalism of the moment. Oh, these kids are annoying me. Oh yeah, we've all been there, right? When parents just aren't doing their job. That was not the case here. There was a larger truth that needed to be realized. So let's start with there. So first of all, what is this perceived compassion that in our situation, it doesn't really matter which party is which, but one party generally claims to be the party of compassion about immigration, and the other is perceived to be the party of harshness. Let's look at that compassion. Is the party that has encouraged for decades now just unrestrained immigration across the border, is it based upon a true concern for the people who are coming across the border? Well, what you can always tell, back in the 80s, during the Clinton-Gore years, it was very popular that right before any election, all of a sudden there would be this push for blanket amnesty. Why? Were they compassionately concerned that immigrants could vote? Well, not exactly. It's just that they wanted to stay in power. This is money. This is power. This is not compassion for the immigrant. And one of the people from that era, interestingly said later, she said, well, if we don't have these people, who's going to do my landscaping and mow my yard? Compassion? Oh no, see, the thing is, what she knows is what a lot of business people know, is that when you hire an illegal immigrant, you don't even have to pay a minimum wage, no matter what their skill level is. We're going to talk about that a little bit later too. This isn't compassion. This is exploitation. From the get-go, the reason we have this illegal immigrant problem to the extent of millions, I mean, this is an epic tragedy going on here, and all we're looking at is deportation. No, let's start at the start. How did we get here? It's by people, in the name of compassion, exploiting a whole people group. Come here and we'll give you free stuff, free healthcare, free phones, free food, free blood, whatever you need, but we're going to give it to you. And we'll try to get you the right to vote. And here in this last election, it wasn't so much a move to give blanket amnesty. It was just an outright effort to give them the freedom to vote, even though they're not citizens here. Compassion? No. Unparalleled thirst, lust for power, political power, and wealth. So it's not compassion. So let's just call it what it is. That we're in this problem because of a thirst for power and wealth. It's not compassion. There's not a good side to this argument politically unless you're on God's side, and that's what we're going to try to work our way through. So let's talk about just the reality of how this looks. So I work with a group in my local area where we find out about people who need help, and we try to organize to get money together and help these people because they just can't afford to do it themselves. One of the families that we helped was a Hispanic family, had 4 people in the family. One of their daughters was pretty much bedridden with an illness, and they lived in a very small home. And because of some problems with the local creek, quite often the bottom of their house would flood on a regular basis. They just had no room to put anything. They were just packed in this house. Their stuff was just sitting out in the living room because they didn't have any storage space. Very small house, very clean and neat house. So we talked to the dad. He was just honest. He said, I don't have a green card. I'm not here legally. He was a very skilled carpenter, and he also was really good at running a Mini-X. And this whole situation occurred in the middle of a construction boom, and there was plenty of work. He was working lots of hours. But of course, he wasn't even being paid minimum wage. He should have been making in our area anywhere from $20 to $30 at least to run a Mini-X. And his carpenter skills were worth even more. But of course, what his employer knew was that with an illegal, you don't have to pay them much of anything. Because if they don't like it, you can just call immigration. And the worker knows that too. They have no justice available to them because they're not legal. They snuck into this country illegally at the encouragement of people in power in Washington. And then they're in this situation where they can't even make a decent wage, regardless of their skills. This is not compassion, folks. We are in this situation because of people who desire to exploit other human beings. So what is the proper response to this? What is the truth of the situation? We as Christians are part of a covenantal system of law, the foundation of which is the Constitution. We don't have just the opportunity to participate in government. We have a duty to do so because this Constitution was an agreement between us and God. Covenantal is always between people and God. So when we come before him as his children, we have an absolute duty to interact with our government to try to ensure that the people who are responsible for this human tragedy are hopefully brought to justice. People who exploit illegal workers in your community need to be brought to justice. They're under no obligation to pay them minimum wage because they shouldn't be hireable at all. There are people who stood in line to get here who are ready to work. The funny arguments that are coming across the internet, who's going to pick our vegetables for $5 an hour? Well, that's abuse. That's exploitation that we're doing it with illegals right now. Yeah, sure, we need to pay more money for our food if we have to pay people, legal workers, more. But here's the other side of that emotional exploitation of people that we saw with Miss Gomez. When she's on there crying about deportation, was she crying about the numerous American women who have been brutally raped and murdered by illegals and gang members who have come across the border illegally? Was she upset about that? And the question is why? It's just because she's been duped. She's been indoctrinated. She thinks this is one party against another, and there's a bad man and a good man, and whatever the bad people are said to be doing wrong, her party just says, hey, you got to go against this. She's not actually showing compassion. She's showing no compassion at all for those American women who are brutally raped and murdered, or their families. It's just nothing. And then, of course, there's also just the human cost of it. It's hard enough to make a living right now, but we're also having our money taken from us and given to illegals for the sole purpose of compassionately helping them? No. So that they'll vote for a certain party at the right time. So what is our response to this? Well, first of all, we need to really push to see that those who are responsible for the problem that we find ourselves in are held accountable before the law. And just one more little update here. I go to Laredo, Texas on a regular basis with my job. And one time I was there, and this was during the first Trump administration, and there was this big uproar over a supposed Trump policy where children were being separated from their parents at the border. Now, the funny thing is, young people heard that and they were just incensed. And some of my young friends, we got to go protest. I'm going, wait a minute. That's not a Trump policy. That policy was enacted in the 80s when Bill Clinton was in office, and it's a very good policy. It's aimed at preventing human trafficking, because what people were being done, illegal immigrants were being paid to shuttle kidnapped children who were not theirs across the border to hand them off to child traffickers for sexual exploitation. So the only way you could figure out who these kids were, because they were usually drugged, is to pull them away from their parents for a moment, do some DNA testing while you also tested the parents and see who these kids really were, see if you could find if these kids had been kidnapped from somewhere else before being moved. It's a great policy. It just kind of shows you that when we get emotionally manipulated like my young friends were, we take part in evil. They were taking part in the sexual exploitation of children just because they emotionally bought an idea presented to them by the press. Folks, that is not a Christian response. That is just pure evil. But anyway, that's the policy that was in place. I was in Laredo getting a haircut. The woman who's cutting my hair, very friendly, and it looked like she was from Mexico. So I just asked her, hey, were you born in Mexico? And she said, oh, yeah. My family immigrated here legally when I was 8 years old. So I said, okay, so what do you think of the border policy going on right now where they're separating the kids from their parents? And she looked around and she said, listen, I think that they should put the army on the border and shoot anyone who tries to cross illegally. She says, in my town, Laredo, I can't even go outside of my house without being afraid. And if something's going on in my neighborhood and I call the police, they won't even come here because the gangs run my neighborhood. And these are all illegals in my neighborhood. The police won't even bother. This woman is living a life of fear in the town she has lived in most of her life because of, compassionate illegal immigration for the purpose of votes, wealth, and power. So this is just the first session about the Christian response. The first thing we need to do is to do our best to see that those who cause this problem are held fully responsible, and also to take responsibility that if we have been emotionally manipulated and we have in error been promoting this kind of a response of, we have to support this because it's compassionate, you need to repent. It is not compassionate. It is exploitation from the get-go. There is a process by which you can enter this country legally, which does a background check, sees if you're on criminal records internationally or in your own country, to protect the citizenry here, but also to allow immigration to occur at a pace where you can come in and find a job, get schooling, whatever you need. It's a good process, and that's what our public officials are called to enforce, to make sure it's carried out, and what they're not doing just because they want to keep their party in power. So, yeah, look at all those other people who are saying, Jesus would look at this rape and murder of women and this exploitation of illegal immigrants and go, yeah, that's what Jesus would do. No, it's not. Anyway, tune in next time. We're going to talk more about this topic of moving towards perhaps a more biblically Christian view than what you're hearing from others on the internet. What do we do when we have this situation of so many people who are here illegally? Till next time, Steve-O out.